The Whitmore family home stood as a testament to suburban success in the quiet town of Millbrook, Connecticut. Its manicured lawn and pristine white siding concealed the turmoil brewing within its walls for James Whitmore Jr., a 35-year-old investment banker. Life seemed perfect on paper: a beautiful wife, a successful career, and a close-knit family. But on a crisp autumn afternoon in 2019, that illusion shattered in an instant. James wasn't supposed to be home that day. A last-minute cancellation of a client meeting had him returning to the house unexpectedly. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed his father's car parked on the street, Robert Whitmore Sr. His frequent visits to check on Melissa had become a source of unease for James, though he'd never quite been able to articulate why. Entering the house quietly, intending to surprise Melissa, James heard muffled sounds coming from upstairs. His heart raced as he ascended the stairs, each creak of the floorboards masked by the increasing volume of what he now recognized as passionate moans. With trembling hands, he pushed open the bedroom door. The scene that greeted him would be forever seared into his memory there in the marital bed. He shared with Melissa writhed two familiar figures, his wife and his own father. The betrayal struck him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. James stood frozen, unnoticed by the entangled couple. His mind reeled, unable to process the magnitude of this betrayal. Yet, as the initial shock began to subside, fragments of memories started to surface. Moments he dismissed or rationalized away. Over the years, he remembered family vacations where his father's eyes lingered too long. On Melissa, the way Robert Sr. would find excuses to touch her arm or small of her back during family gatherings. The increasingly frequent visits to their home, always when James was at work. Each incident seemed innocent enough in isolation, but now they formed a damning pattern. James had always prided himself on his relationship with his father. Robert Sr. was charming, charismatic, the life of every party. James had grown up idolizing him, striving to emulate his success in business and his easy way with people. Now he realized that same charm had been weaponized against him, used to seduce his own wife. Before either of them could spot him, James retreated silently. He stumbled down the stairs and out of the house, his world crumbling around him, sitting in his car hands, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He struggled to breathe through the waves of shock and rage that washed over him. As the initial numbness began to fade, a cold, calculated anger took its place. James started his car and drove with no particular destination in mind. He needed time to think, to plan. This betrayal couldn't go unanswered. For the next several days, James went through the motions of his daily life like a man sleepwalking. He avoided both Melissa and his father, making excuses about late nights at the office and early morning meetings. Neither seemed to suspect that anything was amiss, their own guilt perhaps blinding them to the change in James's demeanor. During these days, a plan began to form in James' mind. He couldn't confront them directly. The thought of hearing their excuses, their pleas for forgiveness, made his stomach turn. No, this required a more permanent solution, one that would ensure he never had to look his father in the eye again. James began to meticulously research and prepare. He studied his father's routines, the layout of the elder Whitmore's home, and most importantly, how to stage an axe that would be beyond suspicion. His background in finance proved unexpectedly useful as he plotted out every detail with the precision of a complex financial model. As the days passed, Melissa grew concerned about James's distant behavior. She reached out to her father-in-law, worried that work stress might be affecting her husband. James overheard one of their hushed phone conversations, the easy familiarity in their tones only fueling his rage. It was clear now that their relationship went far beyond the bounds of familial affection. On the 7th day after his discovery, James put his plan into motion. He invited his father over for dinner, claiming he wanted advice on a potential career move. Robert Whitmore Sr., perhaps seeing this as an opportunity to maintain his facade of the caring father, readily agreed. The stage was set. James Whitmore Jr., once a loving son and devoted husband, was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. As he prepared for his father's arrival, he felt a strange calm settle over him. In his mind, justice was about to be served. Little did James know that his actions would set in motion a chain of events that would not only destroy his family, but also unravel the very fabric of his own life. The tragedy of the Whitmore family was only beginning, and its echoes would resonate far beyond the quiet streets of Millbrook as twilights settled over Millbrook. Robert Whitmore Sr.'s car pulled into the driveway of his son's home. James watched from the window, his heart pounding, hands steady. He had sent Melissa away for the evening, fabricating a story about a surprise he was planning for her. Robert Sr. entered the house with his usual confidence, swagger a bottle of expensive whiskey in hand. "Jamie, my boy," he called out using the childhood nickname that now made James' skin crawl. "Where's that beautiful wife of yours?" James forced a smile. "She's out with friends. I thought we could have a men's night, like old times for the next hour." James played the part of the dutiful son. They discussed work, sports, politics, all while James carefully monitored his father's whiskey intake. As Robert Sr. grew more inebriated, James suggested they move their conversation to the backyard patio. The cool night air hit them as they stepped outside. James had strategically placed 2 chairs near the edge of the patio, close to the steps leading down to the pool area. He guided his father to one of the seats, making sure Robert Sr. had a clear view of the meticulously maintained backyard. "You've done well for yourself, son," Robert Sr. slurred, gesturing broadly at the property. "Nice house, beautiful wife. You're living the dream." James felt bile rise in his throat at the mention of Melissa. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come about. "Melissa, Dad," he began, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I know what's been going on between you two." Robert Sr's face froze for a moment before a sly grin spread across his features. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jamie," he said, but his tone was more amused than defensive. "Don't lie to me," James shouted, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "I saw you together in my bed. How could you do this to me?" "Your own son." Robert Sr. leaned back in his chair, swirling the whiskey in his glass. His eyes, though slightly unfocused from the alcohol, held a spark of defiance. "Oh, that," he said casually. "Well, son, sometimes a woman needs a real man. Clearly you weren't up to the task." James felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Robert Sr. laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the quiet night. "It means, Jam boy, that your wife came to me. She was unsatisfied, unfulfilled. I simply gave her what you couldn't." "You're lying," James whispered, but doubt had begun to creep into his mind. "Am I?" Robert Sr. stood up, swaying slightly. "Face it, son, you've always been second best in business, in life, and now in your own marriage. Melissa knows who the real man in this family is." Something snapped inside James. The carefully orchestrated accident was forgotten with a roar of anguish. He lunged at his father. They grappled. Robert Sr. down was drunken state, making him slower but no less strong. They stumbled dangerously close to the edge of the patio. "You ruined everything," James yelled, pushing against his father's chest. Robert Sr. sneered. "I took what was offered, not my fault. You can't satisfy your own wife in a blur of motion." James gave his father a hard shove. Robert Sr. caught off balance, teetered on the edge of the steps for a moment. Time seemed to stand still. James saw a flicker of fear cross his father's face, the first real emotion he'd seen all night. Then Robert Sr. fell backwards, the sickening crack of skull meeting concrete echoed through the night. James stood frozen, watching the pool of blood slowly spreading around his father's head. He had imagined this moment countless times over the past week, but the reality was far more visceral than he had anticipated after what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes. James sprang into action. His mind raced, recalling the plan he had meticulously prepared. He scattered some of the whiskey around his father's body and placed the bottle near his hand. Then he used his father's phone to make a call to his own number, letting it ring once before hanging up, creating the illusion that Robert Sr. had tried to call for help. James' hands shook as he dialed 911. He took a deep breath, forcing his voice to tremble with what the dispatcher would assume was shock and grief. "Please help my father." He's fallen by the pool. There's so much blood. Please hurry." As he waited for the ambulance to arrive, James stared at his father's lifeless body. The man who had loomed so large in his life now lay still and broken on the concrete. James felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, guilt, anger, and a profound sense of loss. He had eliminated the source of his pain, avenged the betrayal, but at what cost? The distant wail of sirens snapped James back to reality. He quickly composed himself, ready to play the part of the grieving son. As the first responders rushed into the backyard, James allowed himself one final thought before submerging himself. In the lie he would now have to live. "I'm sorry, Dad, but you left me no choice." Detective Sarah Chun arrived at the Whitmore residence early the next morning. The scene had been secured overnight, but the first light of day revealed new details. She surveyed the area, noting the toppled patio chair, the whiskey bottle lying near the victim's outstretched hand, and the dried blood staining the concrete around the pool. "Walk me through it again," Chun said to James, who stood nearby, his eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. James recounted the story. He had rehearsed. "We were having drinks on the patio. He was pretty drunk. I went inside to use the bathroom. When I came back out, he was..." James' voice cracked convincingly. "He was just lying there." Chun nodded sympathetically, but her keen eyes didn't miss the slight tremor in James' hands. "And your wife, where was she during all this out?" "With friends. I've already called her. She's on her way back now." As if on cue, a car pulled into the driveway. Melissa Whitmore rushed out, her face a mask of shock and grief. Chun watched as James embraced his wife, noting the stiffness in their interaction. Over the next few weeks, Chun delved deeper into the Whitmore family dynamics. She interviewed neighbors, colleagues, and friends. Most painted a picture of a close-knit, successful family, but there were hints of underlying tensions. Robert was always very attentive to Melissa. One neighbor mentioned hesitantly, "Sometimes it seemed a bit much for a father-in-law." Chen's interest was piqued. She began to look more closely at Robert Sr. as history. Discreet inquiries revealed a pattern of flirtations and possible affairs, though nothing had ever been officially reported. The detective also focused on James' alibi. She obtained security footage from his office confirming his presence at work on the day of the incident. However, she noticed that he left earlier than usual, giving him a wider window of opportunity than he had initially claimed. 6 weeks into the investigation, Chun received an anonymous tip. A woman claiming to be a former employee at Robert Sr.'s company hinted at inappropriate behavior between the deceased and his daughter-in-law. Though unsubstantiated, it was enough for Chun to dig deeper into Melissa's background. Financial records showed several large transfers from Robert Sr.'s personal account to Melissa's over the past year. When confronted, Melissa claimed they were loans to help with her fledgling interior design business. Chun wasn't convinced. The breakthrough came 3 months into the investigation. While re-examining the crime scene photos, Chun noticed something odd in the background of one image: a small blinking light partially hidden in a garden gnome near the patio. A warrant was quickly obtained to access the Whitmore's home security system. Though James thought he had disabled all the cameras, he had missed this one, a device Melissa had secretly installed for added security. The footage was grainy but damning. It showed the confrontation between James and his father, the struggle, and the fatal push. Chun now had enough evidence to make an arrest. Early on a Tuesday morning, Chun and her team arrived at the Whitmore residence. James answered the door, his face falling, as he saw the grim determination in the detective's eyes. "James Whitmore," Chun said, her voice steady. "You're under arrest for the murder of Robert Whitmore Sr. You have the right to remain silent." As Chun read him his rights, James' gaze drifted to Melissa, who stood frozen in the hallway. Their eyes met, a world of unspoken accusations passing between them. Chun noticed this exchange, making a mental note to question Melissa more thoroughly as they led James away in handcuffs. The detective couldn't help but feel that they had only scratched the surface of the Whitmore family secrets. The case was far from closed. Chun knew that the upcoming trial would likely reveal even more about the tangled web of betrayal and deceit that had led to this tragic outcome. As she drove back to the station with James in custody, she began to prepare for the media storm that was sure to follow. The Whitmore case was about to become the talk of Millbrook, and Detective Sarah Chun was determined to uncover the whole truth no matter where it led. The Millbrook County Courthouse buzzed with activity. On the opening day of the trial, news vans lined the street, reporters jostling for position as James Whitmore. Once a pillar of the community was led into the building in handcuffs. Inside the courtroom was packed. District Attorney Marcus Whalen, known for his aggressive prosecution style, stood ready to present the state's case. Beside him sat Detective Chen, her face impassive, but her eyes alert, scanning the room. James's defense attorney Elena Rodriguez cut a striking figure in her crisp suit. She leaned close to her client, whispering last-minute advice as they awaited the judge's arrival. Judge Harold Simmons entered, his stern gaze silencing the murmurs in the courtroom. The state of Connecticut versus James Whitmore Jr. He intoned, "Are both sides ready to proceed?" The trial began with Whalen's opening statement. He painted a vivid picture of James as a man consumed by jealousy and rage who murdered his father in cold blood. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Whalen concluded, "the evidence will show that the defendant, James Whitmore Jr., deliberately and with malice of forethought took the life of his own father." Rodriguez countered with a passionate plea, portraying James as a man pushed to the brink by an unthinkable betrayal. "My client discovered a terrible truth." She told the jury his own father, the man he trusted and admired, had seduced his wife. What followed was not murder but a tragedy, born of human frailty. Over the next 2 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Neighbors testified to the Whitmore family's seemingly perfect facade. Colleagues spoke of James' dedication to his work and his apparent devotion to his wife. Detective Chen's testimony was pivotal. She methodically laid out the evidence, from the inconsistencies in James's initial statement to the damning security footage. Under Rodriguez's cross-examination, Chen admitted that the investigation had also uncovered evidence of Robert Sr.'s inappropriate behavior with Melissa. The courtroom fell silent when Melissa took the stand, torn between self-preservation and guilt. She initially tried to downplay her relationship with Robert Sr., but under Whalen's relentless questioning, the truth emerged. "Yes," Melissa finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was having an affair with Robert." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. James sat motionless, his face a mask of pain and betrayal. Rodriguez seized on this revelation in her defense. She argued passionately that James had acted in the heat of passion, driven to extremes by his father's and wife's betrayal. "This is not a case of premeditated murder," she insisted. "It is a tragedy brought about by human weakness and betrayal." As the trial neared its end, James himself took the stand in a voice choked with emotion. He recounted the night of his father's death. He spoke of his shock at discovering the affair, the confrontation with his father, and the struggle that led to the fatal fall. "I never meant for him to die," James said, his eyes brimming with tears. "I just wanted the truth. I wanted it to stop." In his closing argument, Whalen reminded the jury of the physical evidence and James's attempts to cover up the crime regardless of the circumstances. He argued the defendant made a choice to end his father's life, that is murder, plain and simple. Rodriguez, in her final appeal to the jury, emphasized the emotional context of the crime. "My client was betrayed in the most painful way imaginable." She said his actions, while tragic, were those of a man pushed beyond his limits. "This is not murder, but a case that calls for compassion and understanding." The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady as she read the verdict on the charge of murder. "In the second degree, we find the defendant, James Whitmore Jr., guilty." James closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging. Melissa let out a muffled sob from the gallery. Judge Simmons, taking into account the circumstances of the crime, sentenced James to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. As James was led away, he caught a final glimpse of Melissa and his mother, Eleanor, sitting together in the courtroom. Melissa's face was a mask of conflicting emotions: relief, guilt, and a hint of something that might have been regret. Eleanor, however, stared at her son with a mix of sorrow and steely determination. What James didn't know was that Eleanor had made a decision that would change everything. In her hands, she clutched a USB drive containing additional security footage. Footage that not only further incriminated James, but also exposed the true extent of Robert Sr. and Melissa's betrayal. As the courtroom emptied, Eleanor approached Detective Chun. "There's something you need to see," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears in her eyes. "It won't change what my son did, but people need to know the whole truth." The Whitmore family tragedy was far from over. As James began his prison sentence, the world was about to learn the full sordid tale of betrayal, revenge, and the devastating consequences of buried secrets. Eleanor Whitmore sat in Detective Chen's office, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of lukewarm coffee. The detective inserted the USB drive into her computer, and both women leaned forward as the footage began to play. The video taken from multiple hidden cameras throughout the Whitmore home revealed a sordid tale far beyond what had come out in the trial. It showed numerous encounters between Robert Sr. and Melissa dating back nearly 2 years. More disturbingly, it captured conversations that implied Robert Sr. had been manipulating both Melissa and James for years, playing them against each other for his own amusement. "I installed the cameras when I first suspected Robert was cheating," Eleanor explained, her voice trembling. "I never imagined this." Chen's face was grim as she watched Mrs. Whitmore. "This footage could significantly impact the case. It doesn't exonerate your son, but it does provide crucial context." Over the next few weeks, the legal system churned into motion once again. James's attorney, Elena Rodriguez, filed for an appeal based on the new evidence. The media exploded with renewed interest in the case, dubbing it the Whitmore Horror. Melissa, now implicated in a long-term affair and potential conspiracy, faced her own legal troubles. The district attorney's office considered charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. As the appeal process began, James remained in prison, struggling to adjust to his new reality. His days were a mono, this blur of routine and regret. The only bright spots were visits from his mother, who kept him updated on the ongoing legal battles. Meanwhile, Eleanor became an unexpected advocate for truth and justice. She gave interviews, spoke at community meetings, and worked tirelessly to expose the full extent of her late husband's manipulations. "I failed my son," she told a reporter from the Millbrook Gazette. "I knew Robert was unfaithful, but I never imagined he would betray James like this. I'm doing this to set the record straight, to give James a chance at justice." 6 months after James' conviction, the appeals court agreed to hear the case. The new evidence painted a picture of Robert Sr. as a master manipulator who had orchestrated much of the family's dysfunction. In a surprising turn of events, Melissa agreed to testify in exchange for immunity on the stand. She broke down, revealing the full extent of Robert Sr. as emotional and psychological manipulation. "He threatened to ruin James' career if I didn't comply," she sobbed. "He said he'd destroy everything James had worked for. I was weak. I was scared." The appeals process was lengthy and complex. Legal experts debated the admissibility of the new evidence and its impact on the original verdict. The case became a lightning rod for discussions about family dynamics, infidelity, and the nature of justice. After nearly a year of deliberations and hearings, the appeals court reached a decision. While they didn't overturn James' conviction entirely, they agreed that the new evidence warranted a reconsideration of his sentence. Judge Mariah Tompkins, presiding over the resentencing hearing, addressed the court. "In light of the new evidence presented, this court finds that while Mr. Whitmore's actions were indeed criminal, the circumstances surrounding the crime are far more complex than initially understood." James' sentence was reduced to time served, plus 5 years of probation. As he walked out of the courthouse, a free man, he was met by a sea of reporters and onlookers. Eleanor rushed to embrace her son, tears streaming down both their faces. "I'm so sorry, Mom," James whispered, "for everything." Eleanor held him tighter. "We're going to get through this together," she promised. The aftermath of the Whitmore case lingered. Long after the legal proceedings concluded, James struggled to rebuild his life, attending therapy and slowly reconnecting with his community. Melissa, shunned by many and facing her own legal consequences, left Millbrook to start a new life elsewhere. Eleanor became an advocate for families affected by infidelity and psychological abuse, starting a support group that quickly grew beyond Millbrook's borders. As for Detective Chun, the case prompted her to dig deeper into other seemingly clear-cut crimes, always searching for the hidden truths beneath the surface. The Whitmore tragedy served as a stark reminder to the community that beneath the veneer of perfection, every family has its secrets. It sparked conversations about trust, betrayal, and the complex nature of justice in a world where the line between victim and perpetrator is not always clear. In the end, the case left an indelible mark on Millbrook, and all those involved a testament to the far-reaching consequences of betrayal and the enduring power of truth. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, please like, subscribe, and share so you won't miss our next chilling tales. And never forget, betrayal, no matter how carefully hidden, always leaves fractures that eventually shatter even the strongest-looking families. When truth is buried beneath lies, it doesn't just destroy trust. It reshapes justice, leaving scars that no verdict can fully heal.